Story number 1. Audit Trail. I arrived at the Billings Regional Office on March 12th to conduct a routine quarterly audit of procurement records dating back 18 months. The assignment was standard. I had completed similar reviews at 7 other regional facilities over the past 2 years without incident. The records clerk, a woman named Patricia Voss who had worked in the office for 11 years, directed me to the basement archive room. She provided me with the access code and mentioned in passing that the previous auditor had requested a transfer before completing the review. When I asked why, she said she didn't know. He had worked there for 3 days in January, then submitted his transfer request and left. She said he seemed fine but didn't elaborate. The archive room was climate-controlled and well-maintained. The filing system was older but functional. I began with procurement records from the previous fiscal year, working backward through requisitions, purchase orders, and expense reports. The first day was unremarkable. On the second day, I noticed that several requisition forms dated January through March of the prior year were filed in reverse chronological order, which violated standard archiving protocol. It was a minor discrepancy. I made a note and continued. Then I found that the misfiling was consistent across multiple folders, as though someone had deliberately reorganized them. While cross-referencing expense codes against the master ledger, I found 16 purchase orders for office supplies that had been submitted by employees with no personnel files. The names were formatted correctly: last name, first name, middle initial. The badge numbers followed the proper sequence. But when I checked them against the security database, none of the badge numbers existed. I ran the names through the personnel system. No matches. I assumed it was a data entry error or a legacy issue from a previous record-keeping system. I flagged the items and continued the audit. On the third day, I reported the discrepancy to the regional director, Michael Caro. He reviewed my notes in his office with the door closed. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me to continue the audit, but advised that some legacy records contained what he called administrative artifacts from a defunct tracking system that had been decommissioned 4 years earlier. He said the phantom entries were known, that they had been reviewed by internal compliance, and that I should note them but not delay the audit. He did not provide documentation of the prior review. I returned to the archive room. The explanation didn't fit. The purchase orders I had found were dated within the last 18 months, well after the system he mentioned had been decommissioned. I pulled the folders again and checked the dates. On the fourth day, I discovered that the phantom purchase orders were still being generated. 3 new ones had appeared in the current fiscal year folder since I began the audit. I knew this because I had reviewed that folder on the first day, and those forms had not been there. I checked my notes. I checked the folder log. No one else had accessed the archive room during my assignment. The forms were physically printed on correct agency stock, properly stamped, and signed with names that matched no current or former employees in any accessible database. The signatures were consistent across all the documents. The handwriting was identical for each name. The items requested were standard: printer paper, toner cartridges, file folders, pens. The quantities were reasonable. The forms had been approved by a supervisor whose name also did not exist in any personnel record. I photographed the documents with my agency-issued device and sent an encrypted report to the Office of Internal Compliance. I included the badge numbers, the dates, and the fact that new forms were appearing in a controlled archive during an active audit. I received a reply 6 hours later. I was instructed to cease review immediately, surrender all documentation, and return to my home office in Denver for reassignment. The message included a case number I did not recognize and a directive not to discuss the findings with regional staff. I packed my materials and informed Patricia Voss that I was concluding the audit early. She asked if everything was all right. I told her it was. She looked at me for a moment and then said the previous auditor had said the same thing. I left the building at 4:30 that afternoon. I did not return to the archive room. 2 days after I returned to Denver, I was contacted by a compliance officer I had never met. He interviewed me in a secure room for 40 minutes. He asked detailed questions about what I had touched, what I had photographed, and whether I had made copies of any documents outside the encrypted reporting system. I told him I had followed protocol exactly. He thanked me and said the matter was being handled. The following week, I received notification that the Billings Records room had been declared temporarily inaccessible for environmental remediation. All materials were transferred to a facility in Fort Meade that I was not authorized to access. The transfer was classified as a preservation action due to environmental contamination risk. No further details were provided. My audit report was classified as incomplete due to insufficient source documentation. I was instructed not to discuss the assignment with colleagues or include it in my performance review. The case file was sealed under an administrative code I had never encountered in 8 years of service. I have not been assigned another audit in Montana. The Billings Regional Office remains operational. Patricia Voss still works there, according to the internal directory. The archive room was reopened 5 months later with no public explanation for the closure. I do not know what happened to the previous auditor. I do not know who generated the purchase orders or why they continue to appear. I was told the matter was resolved through administrative channels and that no further action was required. The incident is closed. Story number 2, Witness 7. I arrived at the Vermont Safe House on Thursday afternoon for the standard weekly check-in. The property sat 2 miles off Route 14, a single-story ranch with vinyl siding and a gravel turnaround. I'd been handling this witness for 7 months. Former accountant. Boston testimony. Organized crime figures with long memories. The relocation had gone smoothly until now. He answered the door on the second knock. His name was Michael Torrance, 53, grey at the temples, soft hands. He looked tired, not frightened, just worn down in a way I'd seen before in people who weren't sleeping properly. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Fine," he said. "Come in." The house smelled like coffee and something else, something stale. I followed him to the kitchen table where we always conducted the check-in. He sat down heavily and rubbed his face. "You look tired," I said. "I've been hearing footsteps," he said. "Upstairs, at night." I glanced at the ceiling. "Upstairs." "I know," he said. "There is no upstairs." I pulled out my checklist. Standard questions first. Had anyone approached him? Had he noticed vehicles he didn't recognize? Had he deviated from his movement restrictions? No, 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 he answered mechanically, like he was thinking about something else. "Tell me about the footsteps," I said. "They started maybe 10 days ago," he said. "Always at night, 3 or 4 steps, like someone walking across a room. Then they stop. Then they start again, somewhere else." "Could be the structure settling," I said. "Temperature changes." "That's what I thought," he said. I wrote it down anyway. After the interview, I conducted the standard security sweep. I checked the perimeter, the locks, the phone line. Then I went through the interior. The house had 4 rooms and a bathroom. Everything on one level. I opened the hallway closet and looked up. No attic access. Just a flat ceiling with textured paint. In the living room, I stopped and listened. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I was about to rejoin Torrance when I heard it. 3 footsteps directly overhead. Slow, deliberate, the sound of weight on floorboards. I looked up at the ceiling. Nothing moved. I walked back to the kitchen. Torrance was pouring himself more coffee. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" he said. I studied his face. He wasn't lying. He genuinely hadn't registered it. "Nothing," I said. I called my field supervisor from the car. I explained the situation and requested a structural inspection and possible relocation. There was a long pause on the line. "Does the witness feel unsafe?" she asked. "He's hearing things that shouldn't be there," I said. "Does he feel unsafe?" she repeated. "No," I admitted. "His file indicates a history of anxiety," she said. "Complete the check-in. file a standard report. We'll review it Monday. I sat in the car for a while after that. The sun was setting behind the tree line. I should have driven back to Burlington. Instead, I parked at the end of the driveway and waited. The lights went off in the house around 10. I stayed in the car with the windows cracked. At 11:34 at night, I heard it clearly through the night air. Footsteps, pacing, a steady rhythm from inside the house, from above the house, from somewhere that had no physical location. I got out and approached the front door. Torrance had given me a spare key. I let myself in quietly. The living room was dark. I could hear him snoring in the bedroom. The footsteps continued overhead, back and forth, wall to wall, the sound of someone pacing in an empty room. Then I heard something else, a scraping sound, heavy furniture being dragged across a floor. I stood there for 4 hours. The sounds never stopped. They moved from room to room, always above me, always just out of reach. At one point, I stood directly beneath what sounded like a chair being pushed across wood, and I could feel nothing, no vibration, no movement in the ceiling itself. At 3:47 in the morning, I retrieved my flashlight and service weapon from the car. I moved the hallway closet shelf and pushed up one of the ceiling tiles. I pulled myself into the crawl space. It was shallow, maybe 2 feet of clearance. Insulation between the joists. Electrical wiring. Ductwork. I swept the flashlight across the space. Nothing. But the footsteps continued. They were all around me now, close enough to touch, coming from every direction, and no direction at all. I stayed up there for 20 minutes. The sounds didn't stop, and they didn't change. I climbed back down and replaced the ceiling tile. I woke Torrance at dawn. He was confused, but compliant. I told him to pack a bag, that we were leaving for a security review. I didn't tell him I had no authorization. We drove to a Holiday Inn outside Montpellier. I paid cash for the room and told him to stay inside. "What's happening?" he asked. "Precautionary measure," I said. He slept for 11 hours. When I checked on him that evening, he said it was the first real sleep he'd had in weeks. I filed my report on Friday. I documented everything exactly as it had occurred. On Tuesday, I received a brief email from my supervisor. The safe house had been decommissioned due to structural concerns. Torrance had been transferred to a different handler in a different district. I was being rotated to desk duty for 6 months, pending standard psychological evaluation. The evaluation took 3 weeks. I answered the questions honestly. I was cleared for return to field duty in March. My report was filed under administrative review and archived without further comment. I never worked with Torrance again. I never went back to that house. When I checked the county records 8 months later, the property had been sold to a management company I didn't recognize. The listing described it as a single-story ranch with original hardwood floors throughout. The file was closed. The incident was classified as resolved through routine reassignment. No additional investigation was deemed necessary. Story number 3, Tower 12. I arrived at Station Whiskey 7 on November 14th for a standard 72-hour solo rotation, monitoring maritime radio frequencies along the Olympic Peninsula coastline. The station sat on a wooded ridge 3 miles inland, a concrete block structure with a generator shed and a satellite uplink that reported to Naval Communications Command every 6 hours. I had completed 11 previous rotations at coastal listening posts. This was routine work. The first night passed normally. I logged commercial traffic, weather broadcasts, and occasional Coast Guard chatter. The equipment functioned within parameters. At 0347 hours, I detected a faint transmission on frequency 4724 kHz, an unused military band that had been decommissioned in 1968. I checked the station's frequency allocation chart twice to confirm. The voice was reading coordinates. Male voice, no accent I could place, speaking in a transmission protocol I recognized from training materials marked historical reference only. The format had not been used operationally since before I was born. The voice spoke continuously without pause for acknowledgement. I recorded a 2-minute sample and logged the transmission as possible equipment malfunction or atmospheric skid propagation. The voice continued for 6 hours. I monitored intermittently while maintaining my standard logging routine. The coordinates formed a precise grid pattern moving steadily northward up the coast, each set spaced at exact intervals. The signal strength remained constant. At EO 947 hours, the transmission stopped mid-sequence. I completed my first daily report and transmitted it via satellite uplink at 1200 hours. I documented the anomalous transmission in the technical notes section. The reply came back with my scheduled weather update, continue monitoring, maintain standard protocols. On the second night, the transmission returned at 0347 hours. Same voice, same frequency, but the coordinates had advanced northward from where they had stopped. I verified the continuity against my previous log. The pattern had resumed without repetition or gap. At SO4 112 hours, the transmission shifted. It moved to frequency 6215 kHz, a channel I was actively monitoring for Coast Guard communications. The coordinate sequence overlaid itself on top of current Coast Guard traffic that continued normally underneath. I could hear both transmissions simultaneously, occupying the same channel, neither interfering with the other. I adjusted the receiver's filters. The phenomenon persisted. I heard a Coast Guard cutter reporting its position while the voice read, "Coordinates beneath it," both signals clear and distinct. I attempted to triangulate the source using the station's direction. Finding equipment. The DF antenna array was mounted on the roof, calibrated within the last 6 months. I took bearings at 3 separate times over the course of an hour. The signal appeared to originate from a point 17 miles offshore, bearing 287 degrees. I cross-referenced the location with nautical charts. Depth at that position, 30-40 fathoms. Open water, no structures, no vessels on my radar display, no maritime traffic reported in that area. I documented the findings in my log. At 1200 hours, I transmitted my daily report. The reply came back, continue monitoring, do not break radio silence, maintain standard protocols. The transmission continued through the second day, shifting between frequencies at irregular intervals. Sometimes it appeared on decommissioned bands. Sometimes it overlaid active channels. The coordinates continued their northward progression. I calculated the rate of advancement, approximately 11 nautical miles per 24-hour period. I did not include this analysis in my report. By the third night, I could hear my own voice in the transmission. At 0347 hours, when the broadcast resumed, I recognized words I had spoken into routine logs hours earlier. My voice reading equipment status checks, my voice noting weather conditions, repeated back with the same inflection but embedded within the continuous coordinate sequence. The voice would read a coordinate set, then speak a fragment of my recorded log entry, then continue with the next coordinates. I reviewed my audio logs to confirm. The fragments matched exactly. Timing, phrasing, background noise. I had not transmitted these logs. They were recorded locally for my own documentation, stored on the station's internal system, not connected to any outgoing communications array. I maintained my logging routine. Protocol required me to report technical anomalies, but the standing order had specified maintaining radio silence. I interpreted this as superseding standard reporting requirements. I continued monitoring. The coordinates advanced northward. At 2000 hours on the third night, I calculated the pattern's terminus. If the progression continued at its current rate and bearing, the coordinate sequence would terminate at the station's exact location at approximately 0600 hours on November 17th. I did not transmit this calculation. I remained at my station through the night. The transmission continued. At DO 200 hours, I heard my own voice speaking words I had not yet said, reading log entries I had not yet written. I stopped documenting my observations in audio format. I maintained written logs only. At 0347 hours, the transmission was close. The direction-finding equipment indicated a source less than 3 miles distant, bearing directly toward the station. At 0430 hours, less than 1 mile. The signal strength increased. I could hear it without headphones, coming through the speakers, through the equipment housing, through the walls. At 0530 hours, the transmission stopped. The equipment fell silent. I checked the receivers, all functioning normally. I scanned the frequencies manually. Nothing. I reviewed the automatic logging system. It showed no record of any activity on the decommissioned frequencies. No record of the overlapping transmissions. The digital logs contained only standard maritime traffic. My relief arrived at 0600 on November 17th. Chief Petty Officer Brennan, 7 years of coastal monitoring experience. I provided him with a verbal briefing on equipment status and notable traffic from the previous 72 hours. I did not mention the transmission. My written logs documented only standard operations. I signed out at 0615 hours. I submitted a standard rotation report documenting equipment performance as nominal. 3 days later, I received reassignment orders to desk analysis at the Seattle office, effective immediately. My security clearance was modified to exclude coastal monitoring duties. No explanation was provided. I did not request one. The incident was logged under Equipment Maintenance Review and archived. Station Whiskey 7 was upgraded to 2-person rotation status the following month. I have not returned to coastal monitoring assignments.